Hi, everyone. I'm Cantor Eyal Bitton from Congregation Neveh Shalom in Portland. Most of you know that, but it bears repeating in case not everyone knows. And I started this series a few weeks ago as after the October 7th massacre took place. There was a great deal, and there has been and there will be a great deal of reflection and processing going on by many people, but certainly Jews around the world, in Israel and outside of Israel, at all kinds of levels. And we talk and we deal with it. And we talk to our friends, we talk to our partners in our homes, and we talk to people in our community to understand what happened and to understand what we do about it and where our ground is shifting. And we want to know we want to try to figure out how our feet are going to land on the ground after this. So we process and we look at it from all sorts of angles. So a few weeks ago, I started this program called Conversations about Israel and Jewish Identity, because we need to look at this from, I think it affects all of those things. And I had a couple of installments, and today's installment should be a light one, I'm joking, called Antisemitism on Campus. I did a similar session a year ago with a social media star in the student world named Blake Flayton, and I was trying to ring the alarm bells at that point and earlier, looking at some of those questions was disturbing to see that they were the same questions I will ask today, and perhaps things are, well, not perhaps, certainly things have gotten worse. Before we go into the conversation, I wanted to give an overview of some of the environment that is taking place, that Jewish students are experiencing on campus around the States and in Canada. So I compiled a short is all relative, about a 2-minute video, which I will share with you, and then we will begin our conversation with our special guest.
Why are you ripping it down? Don't have an answer. Why are you ripping it down? You didn't put that there. It's not yours to take down.
We terrified them. Take up space. We will be loud. We will make them afraid. We will make them uncomfortable. We will get in their way until they understand and they realize that we will keep doing so, and they will have to give up.
Students at Mark Garneau Collegiate Institute in Toronto organized a peaceful school walkout in solidarity with Palestine today. Over 500 students gathered to express their support for the Palestinian cause, demanding peace and justice in the region.
You can imagine scrolling on your phone one day only to discover that a fellow student wants to shoot up the kosher dining hall and I quote, gang rape all Jew pig women on campus. That is what my peers and I experienced last week when reading the multiple online threats made by a fellow student instructing other Cornell students to assault Jews on campus, to follow them home and slit their throats. This was not just hate speech. It was a call to action and an immediate threat. The sentiment did not begin with that student. Professors and student organizations have been fueling Jew hatred and spreading it across campus with disregard or potentially even with deliberate intent to incite.
Free Palestine! Anti-Zionism is not anti-Zionism!
The meeting will be in order. Meeting will be in order.
It's disturbing. It's very disturbing. And I try to collect samplings from various places in the States and in Canada. And there's more. There's a lot more. And I'd like to turn now to our special guest, Professor Marat Grinberg, professor of Russian and Humanities in the Russian department, part of Literature and Languages at Reed College, with a background, a BA in Comparative Literature from Columbia University, and in Modern Jewish Studies from the Jewish Theological Seminary, JTS, in 1999. And I'm sure there's a lot more to say, but for our purposes, I will leave it there in terms of a bio. Marat, thank you very, very much for joining me today to have this discussion. Let me just start with, I think we'll start with some of what we saw and then focus a bit more on the particulars that I've read a little later on, but there'll be crossover. So with what you saw just there, is that will not shock you. You've seen this, right? And has this been going on since before October 7th, or is this new? I think I know the answer, but I'll put it to you. Oh, yeah, you have to be here. Asked to unmute. Are you able to unmute now? No.
Yes,
Lisa?
I did.
Okay. Okay. So
thank you for Eyal, Cantor, Bitton for having me, and thank you everybody for joining. And you probably know, some of you probably know me. I have been quite active in the Jewish community in Portland since we came here in 2006, and most of my scholarship is in the area of modern Jewish studies, 20 Jewishness and 20th century Russian and Soviet culture, literature, and film. And so I come to this with quite a bit of background. I mean, thinking about the snippets that you showed at the beginning, I've been living with something very similar, or perhaps even worse. And our students on campus have been living with that since October 7th, and talking to colleagues from other campuses, around the country, with the few exceptions. The picture is pretty bleak everywhere, and of course, each school has its own, peculiarities when it comes to these issues. But the overall picture is pretty bleak. Has this been happening before? Yes. It's been, growing over the years, and so I was prepared, but at the same time, I frankly did not expect the ferocity and of this new wave. Perhaps I should have been more realistic, but it certainly is not a surprise. But the way that it's just how quickly everything was organized, it's almost as if they sort of had the information beforehand and were ready to go with all the Israeli flags to burn and all the banners and everything else. So just the, as I said, the ferocity, the level of organization is quite astounding, but not surprising by any means.
Thank you, Matt. It's disturbing. I find myself saying this a lot. In terms of that ferocity, do you find that that this is what we're seeing in all these protests, these rallies, these events, that, and you'll see where I think just by my question, do you feel that they are indeed protests against Israel, or are they sort of rallies that are on the warpath? And what I mean by that is, when I witnessed protests happening before Israel's response, and we've seen this before with other attacks. We saw it in 2021 when some sort of terrorist attack or bombing or whatever happens against Israel. We see these demonstrations happening in various locations and certainly on campus. And I get the sense that there's more excitement that, oh my gosh, we can actually we can topple Israel. We can topple the Jewish state, as opposed to it being, we just saw something that makes us very upset and we want to protest that. What's the would you concur that that's the sentiment, or is it more a bit of column A, column B? What's the sentiment of these actors?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would not call them protests, right? And they themselves, and I'm using the example from our campus, they themselves, the students who organize these events, various student organizations that organize these events, Students for Justice in Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, they themselves don't call them protests. We had campus shutdown, for Gaza, calling on students to disrupt classes and walk out. Then we had a walkout, so calling for something similar. They're joining with other groups in the area of various stripes, some of them openly supported by Kremlin, for instance. And so these are not protests. These are kind of warring cries that are steeped in absolutely hateful language. And one can absolutely be horrified by the war, right? And no war is pretty, even the wars that are justified, and the war that Israel wages with an existential enemy. One can advocate for Palestinian rights, etc., right? But that's not what these events are doing, right? As I said, they're steeped in this hate language, and some of it comes from, thinking about the participants, comes from just sheer ignorance and utter misunderstanding of Jewish history, Jewish relationship to Israel, but a lot of it also comes from certain ideology that the participants in these rallies or shutdowns, whatever you call them, espouse. Yeah, so it's a mix of all of that, but I certainly would not call them protests, for a cause that they chose. This is something that's a different beast that we're dealing with.
Now, thank you, Marat. Now, you mentioned the walkout, and I want to talk about that in a few minutes. I think that happened at Reed. You just mentioned ideology. I'm curious about exploring that, because we understand, or perhaps it is understandable, that you're going to have among Palestinian and Arabs more support for the, I hate saying the Palestinian cause, but certainly, for lack of a better term, I'll say Palestinian cause, and the Palestinian side, the pro-Hamas side here. You're going to find more of that than in some other parts of society. But we're seeing a marriage, affinity groups, other groups that are seeing, that have allies, that have seen themselves as allies to this group. And that's, thanks to, I think, intersectionality through the years. The Palestinians have built these friendships, these allies. So can you expand on what kind of ideology is being attracted to this, I'll call it a pro-Hamas movement?
Yes, right, and thank you for bringing that up again. Exactly, the fact that these are pro-Hamas, right? Again, rallies, whatever you call them, right? And they're not even hiding that. Yeah, they're absolutely willfully justifying the atrocities that were committed by this murderous terrorist organization that openly calls for the genocide against Jews. They're not hiding that, right? And so you immediately have had people both among, again, the student body or unfortunately some faculty, who are saying, well, that that's a type of resistance that is perfectly justified, considering what Israel has been doing. So thinking about ideology, as I said, it's a mountain that has been growing over a couple of decades. And I was just thinking, personally. So I came to this country, my family came to this country in 1993. From then already independent Ukraine. We came as refugees, fleeing from anti-Semitism. And so in 94, I became a student at Columbia University Jewish Theological Seminary. And in my junior year, or maybe it was my senior year, I took a course at Columbia called Introduction to Modern Islamic Civilization. And that course was supposed to be taught by Edward Said, probably the name that is familiar to some of you. Said did not teach the course because he got sick already, with cancer. And at that time, it was taught by somebody else, but Said would come and sit, in the first row, kind of quietly observing. And so the instructor of the course, a lot of what he was saying was anti-Israel. And I would engage, an undergrad student, would engage with him in debates. But what is interesting is that these were impassioned debates, but they were very much within the norm. In other words, from this instructor, I've never heard anything that we now hear every single day from these, from these rallies, or the slogans that we hear from them. And so when I became a graduate student at the University of Chicago, sorry for this kind of person, but I think that will give you sort of the sense of how deteriorating all of this has been over these years. And I was defending proposal for my dissertation, in front of a group of faculty. And my dissertation was about Jewishness in Russian poetry. And so one of the professors who was on my dissertation committee turned to me and said, "Why do you want to write this? Are you a Zionist?" And I looked at him thinking, am I in 1967 Moscow, Kiev? So I said to him, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But not quite sure what that has to do with the topic of my dissertation. But that showed me that things have gotten worse, right? And they got worse and worse and worse and worse. The last war in Gaza in 2014, on social media, I could openly, engage with people who started to say that Israel is genocidal, etc. And I was saying, what you're saying is absolutely outside the norm. Yeah. But that type of sentiment has become so widespread everywhere on our campuses. Yeah. And so you can see just this. I personally have experienced how it was getting worse and worse and worse and worse, infusing everything, every part of academia, from students to administration to faculty, and the type of scholarship that is being produced, right? And so this sort of justification that these protesters groups use, some of which are Jewish groups, right? Like Jewish Voice for Peace, when they say this is not about Jews, this is about Zionists and Israel, first of all, betrays an enormous misreading, misunderstanding of Jewish history, right? But second of all, that's the game that they play. That's the game that they play. Those of us who come from the Soviet Union, and I'm a scholar of this, my most recent book about post-World War II, post-Holocaust Soviet Jewish culture explores that in depth. We understand that when they say Zionists, they mean Jews. That conflation is pretty obvious. I think that probably is not that obvious to many American Jews who are not accustomed to this type of rhetoric. Yeah. And so, and again, some of that, when you look at the students who participate in this, some of that comes from utter and sheer ignorance, yeah. But a lot of that comes from, again, this sort of ideology. I just want to read. Well, first you ask me, then I'll come back to that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. It seems to me you're talking about being from the Soviet Union, right? That I've met so many Jewish people who are from the Soviet bloc, the old Soviet bloc, whether they're from Romania to Ukraine, to Russia itself, who have been keenly aware, it seems to me, for years, about the shift in left part of society in North America. That and this is, it's certainly, I think, more accentuated in the universities, but it's just generally happening, where you see a little bit more, they seem to have like a radar for Marxism, and we see a little bit more. So is it fair to say that the groups that are there, there's a as there's a shift among the general student populace towards neo-Marxism and some of this DEI and social justice movements that kind of touch upon these I was going to say theologies, but these ideologies, that they do. There's this rejection of the West, and this ultimately creates a I recognize that language that you're using, even though I don't agree with Islamism, or some of the other things, but I agree with that. Is that a fair assessment?
Of course. Yes, you have this anti-Zionist, what they call again, this anti-Zionist rhetoric ideology that has been folded into this larger ideological machinery, some of which has these components that you've mentioned, right? When Israel is perceived through this, colonized framework, right? The oppressor and oppressed framework. And so, which again, simplifies to an utmost degree something that is rich and complex, and again just betrays this just profound misunderstanding of Jewish history. And I think, and we've seen these statements from some faculty on campuses who are respected academics, etc., who say, well, if you look and at the history of anti-Zionism, etc., and my response and the response of others, my colleagues, is that yes, we can look at the history, the debates in the Jewish intellectual world prior to the establishment of the State of Israel in the 1920s, 1930s, yes, where there is a vigorous debate, not to mention vigorous debate within the Zionist movement about all sorts of things. Yes. Yeah. But to talk about anti-Zionism when Israel has been in existence for the past 75 years is dishonest.
Right.
Yeah, dishonest. And again, this, I don't need to say, obviously, that disagreeing with certain actions of the Israeli government, it's just a country like any other, right? And you like some aspects of it, you don't like it. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about just debating the very idea of Israel, the very legitimacy of Israel, right? Its place in Jewish history, in the Jewish world, yeah, and that's just so I think it's intellectually dishonest, those who are putting forth that argument that anti-Zionism, but and second of all, it's just extremely dangerous, especially if we think about the young generation of American Jews and the new generation, and that's what they're being fed, and that's what they're facing, and often the students who see all of this happening, they almost intuitively know that that's wrong. They intuitively understand that when they hear from river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that's directed against them. But they don't have the skills. They don't have the ability to really counteract.
So this is why, all right, go ahead, good, Matt, let you conclude. This is why my next session in 2 weeks from now, we're skipping for Thanksgiving, is going to be about transforming Jewish education. I think that
it's going to be a good friend, Naya.
Yes, with Naya left, exactly. And also Soviet yes. Background, and has that, I think, that other perspective. But there's that has to be taught to the younger generation so that they're equipped they have that radar and they're equipped. But in terms of, you raised the Jewish students, the students that are on campus that you're seeing, what's the sentiment? How are they walking afraid? Are they shocked? Are they confused? And what about, I would imagine that so many of them had their home in the political social home in certain social justice causes and feel abandoned now. What are you seeing on that, in terms of that?
Yes, the reports that I and others have gotten from from some of our Jewish students is precisely that: silencing, harassment, being afraid, and that has become kind of the daily experience. Disregarding, yes, that kind of the diversity of, well, not the diversity of political opinions, but the fact that yes, these students very much identify with, with certain causes, but all of that gets overlooked when it comes to Israel, to what is happening now, and just the fact that they're Jews. There are students who have been shamed for being devastated by the events of October 7th.
It's shocking. It's shocking. You would, I think you mentioned this towards the beginning in different words, and you referred to something else, but I would use it for this, which is, I knew that the grounds were, the earth, the things were shifting, and that there was an anti-Israel sentiment, and that far activist left was growing and growing more hostile towards the Jewish. I got that. I knew the potential for another Holocaust was there, but seeing it, and as you said, that the next day after October 7th, the rhetoric was starting everywhere online. Oh, it's really the oppressor, and you can never change that, and we can't tell people how to liberate themselves, etc., etc. Was shocking to me. Now, I want, because we have limited time, I did want to talk about Reed in particular, and you mentioned the walkout. I'm going to show about a very short video clip as well that I compiled from that I found online, and then we can talk about that. I'd like to know more about this walkout that happened just the other day. I'm going to share my screen, everyone. Give me a second. Okay. You see that? Okay. Now, there was more, but I thought since you are going to be talking that we could, have that conversation. I'd rather give more airtime to the not free Palestine movement than to them. And now I found interesting, by the way, this ad, the poster, the flyer that you saw, everyone, said, "Shut it down for Palestine, rally and teach-in, Thursday, November 9th. Okay, so it sounds like it's an upsetting, but okay, a protest of some sort, going to be a walkout. And if you look on the bottom, it says ceasefire now. We know what that means, but okay. And if you didn't understand what that means, their next heading said, end all U.S. aid to Israel. Yep. Okay. So please, Marat, tell us a bit more about this particular walkout and what happened and how it's being perceived on campus.
Yeah. And I have to say, I never, ever publicly discuss or, anything that goes on my campus. Okay. The place where I spent the last 17 years, where I've raised generations of wonderful students, and we continue to have wonderful students and try to do the work that we do in our classrooms. So, but this is all in public domain, and I think it's important for you all in the wider Jewish community to be aware of what's going on. Yes. So we had this campus shut down for Gaza on Thursday, and the student newspaper at Reed called Quest, the only student newspaper on campus, completely run by students, was covering it as they do other events. And the newspaper reached out to me as one of the few Jewish studies scholars on campus to comment on certain terms and express my opinion. And particularly one slogan that was very prominent at this shut campus down was Intifada Everywhere. Mm. And so I provided.
Was it globalized Intifada or Intifada Everywhere?
This particular one, Intifada Everywhere. There was also globalized Intifada. There were chants, right? But Intifada Everywhere. And so I provided my commentary, and I'll just quickly read what I said. I said Intifada stands for violence against Israel and Jews. There were two intifadas, waves of violent uprisings and terror against Israelis in the 1980s and early 2000s, which are responsible for the death of 1,000 innocent civilians. Suicide bombings, which devastated the Israeli society, were part of this. The whole point of the peace process between Israel and Palestinians, which started in the 1990s and led to the establishment of Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, is that Palestinians would renounce violence and stop terror. So by saying there is only one solution, Intifada revolution, and mobilize the Intifada, these protesters condone and legitimize the unspeakable terror Hamas inflicted on the Israeli civilians and call for perpetual violence against them. And it is anti-Semitic. It threatens and is directed against Jewish lives. These slogans have been seen at other campuses. I also suggested a number of sources that can be consulted. And then I also added that particular slogan, Intifada Everywhere, which means violence against Jews, and deadly violence at that, everywhere beyond Israel, right? It's quite clear, calls for bias reports to be filed, and it is unadulterated anti-Semitism. So all of these comments were included in the article. Then again, all of this is available openly if you go to the website. There is a barrage of pretty hateful comments directed against me, directed against the authors of the article. And then a few hours later, all of my content, all of my comments were removed from the article by the authors, saying that they had to do so because they were alerted to the fact that I support views on Twitter which they find disturbing. And it is quite clear that the views that I support on Twitter are pro-Israel views. So the article was purged from my content, and you can make the conclusions about what that means. And then again, you look at the comments, right, that say, well, anonymous comments that say, well, you removed his comments, but the damage has been done, right? And comments that say, well, how dare you ask this Zionist professor, the Soviet Jewish Zionist professor who doesn't know Arabic, about the meaning of this. So that's the contents. And I just want to give you one comment, which I think is so indicative of, again, speaking of ideology, right? So this comment said, that, speaking about Israel, that this article, by including my comments, prioritizes the comfort of a genocidal, bureaucratic ethno-state that is younger than some of the people it aims to destroy and whose land it occupies. Could there be a more profound everything of Jew, right? Younger than some of the people it aims to destroy. So that's where we're dealing with. This comes from students who are at one of the most elite colleges in the United States. And by no means is this a majority of the students on campus, but that's what's in the air, right? That's what's in the air. And we need to put our heads together and think about how this must be combated and stopped for all of our sakes.
Well, amen to that. Thank you, and I'm sorry you went through that. And it's preposterous and pathetic and intellectually dishonest of those the authors of that article to dismiss the validity of a statement or an idea that's expressed by you because they disagree with your views in general, or because you went there, you should be persona non grata and therefore dismissed. You have
because of who I am.
Yeah, it's like you voted for the wrong person locally, therefore you are evil and cannot be. You are excommunicated. It's not what America was about, and it's not
what higher education should be about or liberal arts.
Right. Now, in terms of how to fight it, we're gonna continue the conversation for just a few more minutes. Then I'd like to invite anyone who has a question or a comment to put it in the chat, and we'll try to address as many as we can in the time we have. But in terms of fighting back, we don't have the numbers. It's hard. I remember being at McGill University in 1991 or 92, and the main the main forum for debate between Israel Palestinians was the McGill Daily, this newspaper. And I wrote something that was very critical of Arafat and critical of the head of the Palestinian organization on campus. The next day, a rock was thrown through the window of our house. And I lived in Montreal, so I lived at home, and my sister's life was in danger. And so I stopped writing. Now, what I'm getting at is that how I'm relating it to what we're seeing now. You said it's sort of like, these aren't really protests. They're sort of on the, my words, sort of on the war path. They're war cries. And that there's a lot of intimidation going on. It's not trying to win an argument in terms of proper discourse. There's a lot of intimidation. And so trying to win back the hearts and minds and using reason against this kind of wave doesn't seem to be not only effective, but also doesn't seem to be, doesn't make sense. So one thing that I've seen happening lately is these Title VI lawsuits that have been going on in a few universities, particularly University of Pennsylvania, NYU, and Wellesley. There are lawsuits going on right now and they're charging these universities for failing to protect their Jewish students. We'll see if that works. If it does, I suspect that that's going to be an approach, so the legal system. On that note, DeSantis in Florida tried to deactivate certain groups, and the University of Florida and the University of South Florida did not enact it. They've resisted that. So I think that how to approach this, people get the idea, but there's no set track record of, hey, this particular way works. But it seems to me that these lawsuits and legislation are the way to go. What do you think?
I think so. I think we need to use all the resources, that we have. And I think it's important for, Jewish communities to mobilize.
Yeah.
To put our heads together, overlook the political differences, the diversity of opinions that we have about all sorts of issues, right?
Yeah.
And realize that we're facing something very, very dangerous, especially because we're talking about campuses and the future generations that are being, that are getting out into the wider world. Yeah. I mean, the hope that I have, first of all, the hope that I have is, again, comes from the fact that I'm continuing to teach. My colleagues are continuing to teach, and I teach many courses that deal with, literature of the Holocaust, cinema of the Holocaust. And it's so interesting to see the students, many of whom are not Jewish, obviously, their eyes begin to open up when all of a sudden they realize that Jews are not the embodiment of the white privilege that they've been taught.
Amazing.
But are in fact a people with an enormous history of persecution and an enormous history of combating that persecution. Yeah. And you can just literally see their eyes opening up. Yeah. You have Jewish students, when I teach Yiddish cinema, pre-war Yiddish cinema, starting to cry because they're hearing Yiddish from the screen and realizing that there is enormous cultural wealth that is out there, and that is their heritage, right? And also just the one-on-one conversations as I've been having with some students who come, and say, I know that what they're doing is wrong, and then you talk to them, yeah, and they start to understand, and they start to see. And it's very, very difficult because, as I said, they've been harassed, they've been silenced, they're afraid. Yeah. So I think we need to look at everything at our disposal, including the some of the ways that
legislation and lawsuits. Thank you
mentioned, because the situation is pretty serious.
Yeah, and if we don't find a way to stop it now, not only will it be terrible for our kids as they grow older, but the future leadership of this country is going to look is not going to be very friendly towards us at all.
Absolutely. I work a lot on science fiction, writing a book about Jewishness and Soviet and East European science fiction, and that talks a lot about parallel universes. And sometimes I've been talking to my friends, and it seems like we stepped into a parallel universe where everything is sort of the same as it should be, but not. And if somebody, when we came to this country in 93, if somebody told me, that in 2023, I, a professor, author of 4 books and everything else, would be sitting with the Jewish community and discussing what we're discussing, I would have said, that's not a very good sci-fi novel, right? They can't, it's not plausible at all, but that's where we are. That's where
Amazing. Let's. I'm going to look at it in the chats to see how many questions we can field. We have. Well, what is your book called? I'm interested. It sounds like you have more than one. I would encourage everyone to just. Are they available online? Can we, if they do?
They're available online. They're available at bookstores, including Powell's, and my latest book, The Soviet Jewish Bookshelf. And there are quite a few talks that I did about it. But that touches directly on the history of Soviet anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and how Soviet Jews combated all of that. So, and also just feel free to email to me. I'm happy to answer.
Perfect. Thank you. Corey Rayton asks, can we talk about the fact that students today have never lived through an Israeli government that isn't far right? Their experience of Israel is so tied to the politics. Right. So it's how does that affect the students today with what they're seeing? And I have an answer to that, but I'll leave it to you to answer.
Well, my answer to that is, again, while it is perfectly fine to have debates about Israeli politics, when you understand Israeli politics and you understand the complexity of that society, right? And a great majority of these students know really nothing about that. I mean, they've been hearing that, Netanyahu is evil and the far-right government. And if you happen to subscribe to that notion, yes, because again, of your involvement in Israeli politics and knowledge, but that's not where they're coming from. Let's imagine that right now, it's not Netanyahu who would be the prime minister, but I don't know, Ehud Barak or whoever from the opposition. Nothing would be different. They would still be saying that Israel is a genocidal ethno state. So Israel continues to be a free democratic country that has diversity of opinions, that has a vibrant, vital political life. We know about everything that's been happening prior to October 7th. And of course, the country is so unified now, facing this horrible enemy. So I don't think that's the problem, right? Had we had courses at my campus or other campuses about Israeli politics, we could certainly have debates. Students could certainly have debates in the class about all sorts of opinions because they've been provided with knowledge, right? But that's not where these protesters are coming from. There is a whole lot of just so much misinformation and just yeah.
Thank you, Marat. The other thing I would add to that question and to that answer is that I think what's also underpinning that question is what is or should be, and I don't want to ask you this because that's a whole other conversation, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, to the person who asked the question, it seems to me that underpinning that question is what is our relationship with Israel? And I think that what we saw on October 7th and since in the aftermath has told us that how we relate to Israel or how we related to Israel here in the States is not necessarily how we should be relating to Israel in the future. Meaning whatever our criticisms are, that's one thing, but what is our relationship with this country? And I think I personally, and we're going to be I have a whole other session, I think in the new year about this. And I think Naya Lecht is probably going to talk about that indirectly because the same way that we don't ask an Italian American who is super proud to be Italian American, hey, what do you think of the far right leader that they elected about 2 years ago? It's the furthest right they've had since Mussolini. What do you think about that? How dare you eat pasta today when, or something like that. So I think that's part of the question is like, how do we, but let's leave that aside for now. I
just want to add one. I agree with you. I agree with you 100%, right? And not to mention the fact that, of course, Bibi Netanyahu himself is hardly a far right. there's certainly elements within his government that can be classified, this way. But I agree with what you said, 100%. And filtering and understanding or looking at Israeli politics through the lens of American politics, it's also absolutely misguided and should not be happening. Right? Let's have educated conversations about that, and again, letting Israelis decide what politics they're going to have and how they're going to do that.
So look, I'm looking at a few other questions. Some of them we've already dealt with. Combating, I think someone asks, is there a way to re-educate regarding the Quest, your news, that article? Is there a way to remind the publishers of that, the editors of this paper, what a journalist is supposed to do and what proper journalism is? Is that a lost cause?
I hope not. I hope not. I'd rather not say anything else, but I hope not. I just know and understand that something like this cannot be happening, right? That's just, it's plain wrong. And I hope that will be understood by the parties that need to understand that. And if not, we'll think of other ways, but
Lisa Newman-Eckstein has a question about how students are learning history. Is it weighted towards anti-colonial revisionist history, or are students learning to think critically about history and events?
Yes, I mean, the whole point of college like Reed, which is a wonderful institution, is that critical thinking, the life of the mind, that's the motto of Reed College. And it's still there, and I think most of the conversations that are happening in our classrooms are still doing that. But all of this is happening in a wider world, where definitely there is this ideological sharp turn toward the things that you've mentioned. So it is very hard to escape that. And again, when it comes to Israel, right, just when I teach the Israeli material, I'm probably one of the very, very few people on campus who does that. As soon as you utter the word Israel, you can just feel how the atmosphere in the room changes.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, in the Soviet Union, I mean, lehavdil, as we say in Hebrew, I don't want to compare, but, every time just the word Jew was uttered in the Soviet context, everybody would be, like, what's going on? And so here, when you utter Israel, which is an alert, like, what's going on? Why are we going to talk about this place that is just so bad? And then, of course, once the conversation starts, and you can educate. I mean, that's what educators do. But it's tough to do in this world that we live in, and how to turn that around is going to be excruciatingly difficult. I don't want to say that it's not going to be, but I have hope.
I'm glad you have
against hope. Maybe, I don't know.
Right. We have to have hope, right? But that requires looking at the bleakness in the face and going and confronting it. And I believe as well that that's one part. There's an external part, confronting it, but also teaching ourselves to have our eyes open, and teaching our youth, as you had acknowledged, and as you can hear me say, we have to do better with our youth to kind of let them know the realities that are out there and how to deal with those. I'm looking at. I did a quick search, found that article from the Quest, and I hope it's the right one. I put it in the chat at the bottom.
Yes. Okay. So it's all available. Yeah, and again, I think it should be. And the Jewish community should mobilize, the educators, the clergy, should mobilize and think what we should do. Yeah,
I appreciate that. Cheryl Livney, Columbia University barred Students for Justice in Palestine and JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, for 3 months on campus. So they chartered them. Students are protesting that the groups are barred, and some faculty walked out and protested. So there's resistance to that. But I know one student from there, I think, who wrote to me and just said that while it's a relief as a Jewish student to be in that, to know that the administration has taken those steps, they're still exposed to these people's thinking online. It doesn't really stop, but it's a step in the direction. What do you make of these efforts?
I think these are the necessary steps. I
Okay.
mean, you know, policing anybody is never a good idea, but that's not what we're talking about. Hate speech, right? We're talking about hate speech. That's what it is. The German government, right? The German parliament passed a law that says that from river to the seas is equivalent to Heil Hitler.
Right.
Right? They get it because of the history, right? And so that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a threat that is being posed, and sometimes a physical threat, if we think back, you know, to the videos you showed at the very beginning, to Jewish lives. I mean, Jewish lives matter. Let's just say it, right? And so I think these are Brandeis University also banned. So Columbia suspended. I think Brandeis University permanently banned Students for Justice in Palestine. And it's painful and difficult with some of the Jewish groups. But I think also we, need to realize that some of these really incredibly fringe groups in the wider Jewish world, but they become the center stage on campuses. And somehow they claim to represent the wider Jewish community, that's bizarre. And that's just bizarre. And again, that needs to be explained, right? When they say, as a Jew, don't weaponize my pain, and I have nothing to do with this genocidal state. I don't know where that's coming from ideology, coming from cell hate. Maybe for some it's coming from a deep sentiment. I don't know. But it is fringe, it's bizarre, and it needs to be seen that way. And again, the fact that on college campuses it's front and center is bizarre and disturbing. That's what it is,
Thank you for your reply. I have more to say on it, but I'm going to set aside so I can hear more from people here. Jennifer Perlmutter, how does this campus anti-Semitism tie into the white supremacist narrative that we see on campuses and elsewhere, as well, given that it opposes two ethnic groups that it discredits?
Right, exactly, right? This anti-Zionism, anti-Israel rhetoric is folded into the way that diversity, has been understood. And of course, let's be honest, this country has a horrible history of racism, right? That needs to be combated and remedied, yes. But to see Israel, where half of the population has dark skin and has, Black Jews from Ethiopia, right? To see that, and where, by the way, 20% of the population are Israeli Arabs who have other problems, of course, but who have absolutely the same rights as the Israeli Jews. Yeah, chances are when you go to Israel and you need to go see a doctor in Jerusalem, that's going to be a doctor who happens to be an Arab. 40% of student body at the Haifa University are Arabs. Yeah, so to see the reality of Israel with all of the wonderful things about it and all the problems that it has, just like any other country, through the prism of American history of racism is bizarre. Yes, these analogies don't work, but that's what's been happening. I think this, you showed it. It was on one of the buildings at my alma mater, Columbia University, that had the Magen David, and in the center it said white supremacy, and on one side 48, and the other side 2023. What could be a more bizarre ahistorical, symbol? I mean, even KGB could come up with something else, So.
I'm going to take, I think, one more question, and I apologize to everyone else who, there are some good points here, but I'm going to, Ron here says, is the morale and safety, both physical and intellectual, of Jewish professors and TAs something we should be talking about or concerned with as well?
The morale is low. And I hope I'm not talking about physical threats, however, because it was happening on our campus, when these other external groups come, groups that are violent, yes, then it really does pose a physical threat, and then it really up to campus securities and law enforcement to deal with that, right? And that's just also the reality of the city that we live in. So that's something to be aware of, and again, to be ready to combat it. But the morale is low. across the campuses. I just came back from a conference on Jewish and Holocaust literature, wonderful conference in Miami, and talking to colleagues, and the morale is low. But I also think that the sense of solidarity and the sense of that we can overcome this if we put our heads together is also there. And as they say, Am Yisrael Chai. That's all I can say at this point.
So with that, I will say thank you. And Jennifer adds that PSU, the morale is low there, to concur with what you're saying.
Yes.
No surprise, it's everywhere. Morale is low in the communities, in general. But
let's not forget that we just went through a horrific event, right?
Right, a traumatic one. We are. I can't imagine. Right, we don't know where this is going to land. We as a people, this is seminal. This is a seismic shift in terms of what it will do to the Jewish community, and we don't know what that means in a generation. But I want to say regarding that morale and regarding hope, I think that while those voices, for example, where they've been dechartered, even suspended, these organizations that are basically hate groups for us, while they still have a voice out there, we know they're there and they're online. It's got to be encouraging and empowering to know, the administration of this university at least sees me and recognizes and stands for something, that I stand for. Which is not hate, which is supporting the Jews and is supporting of the diversity of opinions, etc. So I think that in terms of mobilizing, we should be very encouraged, not encouraged, but we should all, as much as possible, encourage others and ourselves to contact the university heads and say, stand for something, stand for what you're supposed to stand for American values, stand for the safety of students, and point out the hypocrisies of their previous positions in so far as that is not consistent with how they treat Jews. But once we have that sense of support, that we're being heard, there's a lot of, in the government, there are a few voices that are in Congress and other places that makes me go, "Ay, that's very scary." And then you hear from Biden more support than from these other maybe members of the squad, for example. I'm like, okay, I disagree with him on this, I disagree with them on that, but I'm getting support from that kind of support is going to help us get through this. And I keep underlining this. We're not in the pogroms of 1882 in Russia, where we're not, where there was no support. The government was behind behind this stuff. That's not the case here. Yes, it's bleak, but there are these glimmers of hope. But we can't, that's that expression. God helps those who help themselves. We've got to mobilize, and some of that.
Allies matter. Absolutely.
And some of that is also, someone referred to this too. Maybe it's also for your own students, finding that university. You might have wanted to go to this university here, but it doesn't stand for your values anymore. So go there, and we will get through this. We have professors like Marat Grinberg here who are, I hate saying it, on the front lines in some ways, but
I should add, certainly my dear friends and colleagues at Portland State University. Yes.
Yeah, and they're, this is the future generation of leaders. This is who is going to. These are the people who are going to run our country. And if we don't help them stand up for, and I don't know that they're the majority, right? But they're out there. So we've got to mobilize. I like that. And let me. I'll ask you for one final comment. You've already kind of addressed it, but if you can, what gives you hope for, and I've talked about this for just now, but what gives you hope for the future? What's a positive message that we can leave with?
Conversations like these, and the fact that we have leaders like you, Cantor, in our community, that's very comforting. And again, as I said, that I can still continue the type of conversations in my courses that I've always been doing, and seeing students' eyes opening and seeing them think critically, and seeing, even as I said, they intuitively know even if they don't have the knowledge, they intuitively know that this should not and cannot be happening in the United States in 2023, that this is wrong. And I think more and more people are getting fed up.
Yeah.
And you know, and as I just saw in the chat, we're all grieving, right? It's like something's been torn from us. And Israel is going through a horrendous, right? I mean, the trauma will be in the Israeli society for generations to come. But also, you know, Jews have, as my mentor, Professor David Ruskis of Yiddish Literature, Jewish Theological Seminary, wrote a book, you know, Against the Apocalypse. Jews have been dealing with this for centuries, and we know how to do that. So I think so that that gives me hope, and you know, yeah.
I appreciate that. And one more thought from me, and then we'll call it a day. You know, you and I underlined that what we're seeing in terms of this activism is more of a war cry than it is a protest. And my feeling is that once this war is won by Israel, once they win this war, that things will calm down. I don't crystal ball, but I think things will calm down over here, and that should not delude us into thinking that the sentiment has changed. We have to use that opportunity, those moments, as the opportunity to change things and to make sure that this sort of response to atrocities and hate cannot be allowed in the future.
Absolutely right. These protests, they have short memories. Once the war ends, they will find another cause. But that cause, the cause that they're, you know, fighting for now, that will absolutely remain in the air, and the sentiment will stay. And yeah, we should be vigilant, right? I think that's the problem with, you know, with American Jews, American Jewish community, with all the love, and I'm, you know, I and my family are part of this community. But you know, you got to be vigilant. You got to be vigilant and realize what you know, what you're dealing with. And I think, you know, Soviet Jews with their experiences can teach a thing or two.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Marat Grinberg, thank you so much for joining us in this important conversation. Good luck with everything. In French, we say courage, you know, be strong. And to everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned. 2 weeks from now, we will have an important discussion with Dr. Naya Lecht on transforming Jewish education. And if I don't see you between now and then,
and it's at 11:45, not 12.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Lecht has a conflict and wants to make sure to speak to us for a full hour. So 11:45 to 12:45 in 2 weeks. We will send reminders to everyone, and it'll be in the public synagogue announcements.
And I'll just say, Naya is wonderful. She's a long-term friend, and but also if there are questions, you know, please feel free to email me. My email is very easy to find, and I'm happy to answer. But please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Marat. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone.